So many of us were at the, is that still too loud? Okay. Many of us were at the installation last night, but some of us weren't. And one of the things that was exciting to me, of the many wise and insightful things that were shared, was that my son read Psalm 139, which has become one of my favorites. I'm going to share with you just a portion of that psalm. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. May we be blessed by our hearing of holy words.
Amen.
Children of God, I'm going to start with telling a story. This past summer, not too long ago, it was in July, that 2 children were caught in a riptide off the coast of a Florida beach. Do you remember that? 2 boys, I believe, 8 and 10, had gone swimming and there was no lifeguard present, and they got caught in the riptide. And their mother heard them crying. And she looked around to see if somebody would dive in to help them, but she realized there was no lifeguard. And so even though everyone told her not to go in, these were her children. So she dove in, trying to save them. And then her mother, their grandmother, dove in, and several other family members all dove in the water trying to save these 2 little boys. And then what happened is that they were all caught in the riptide. There was another woman on the beach who heard the crying and screaming, and she at first thought it was a shark. And then she could see their heads bobbing in the water. And just about that same time, other people on the beach also started to notice. And somewhat organically, they decided to form a human chain. They formed a human chain holding hands out into the riptide, 80 people long, 100 yards into the ocean. By the time they were forming the human chain, the grandmother was having a heart attack. The family was terrified. They were barely alive. And yet, through this human chain, they were able to rescue every single one of them and bring them back to shore safely. They all survived. Many people in that human chain didn't know how to swim. And yet, they risked, and they trusted, and they held tight to one another. That was the power of relationship. It was quick and spontaneous, but if there had not been some human trust, that could not have happened. Those lives would have been lost. That entire family would have experienced a tragic end. I love Psalm 139 because it is beautiful and inspiring, and I love the evocative language. But I also love it because many, many years ago, when I was in my last year of seminary, I was doing my CPE unit. Many of you have done this, but for those who haven't, it's like a chaplaincy internship. And I was doing mine at Westboro State Hospital, which is a Massachusetts state mental facility. I served on a locked ward, which meant that I had keys to go in and out and other people didn't. Most of the people there were people who either had severe mental illness and had no hope of ever leaving, or were people who had been ordered there by the court because of criminal proceedings. I will say now, and it's one moment I wish Mark wasn't in the room, I didn't tell him everything about what I learned about the safety training for 2 days before I was even allowed on the unit. It's a dangerous place to be. My first week there, one of the mental health workers who was supposed to be coming back to the unit committed suicide. She had been so traumatized by an attack that she had experienced the previous year. I got to know mental health workers who had worked there for decades who were attacked and assaulted by the same patients many times. It was a scary place to be. Oh, and I was pregnant. So I didn't tell my husband all of these stories. But one of the things that happened while I was there, meeting one-on-one with patients, just like I've met one-on-one with many of you, is that they really cared about being known. It meant a lot to them to be known. And so I tried to get to know them. Some of them opened up and spoke to me when they hadn't spoken to anyone in a decade. It was a truly life-altering experience for me. And part of what made that so was not just the one-on-one meetings, but was the psalm reading group that we created together. I'm going to say that again, a psalm reading, because it's a little bit tricky on your tongue. It was a psalm reading group. And I can't remember exactly how it happened, except that it was kind of their idea. I think I read a psalm to one of them one day, and one came and sat with us. And next thing I knew, every week we had a group of most of the unit, sometimes including the health workers and the psychiatrists, sitting around a table, taking turns reading psalms. That's when I grew to love this psalm, because it was the favorite. It was the favorite, and we read it every single week, sometimes 2 or 3 times. Everyone wanted their turn to read Psalm 139. Everyone wanted their turn to be reminded that God knows them and loves them completely. Don't we all want that? Family therapist Edwin Freeman, you might know him from Bowen Family Systems Theory, he says that to be known is both our deepest desire and our greatest fear. We so desperately want to be known, and yet when it begins, when we have little inklings of it, we do everything we can to sabotage it. Through our personal relationships, through our collegial relationships, how often have we pulled back when we felt intimacy growing? I think what was different for the people at Westboro State Hospital was they didn't feel the same sense of risk. I think they felt like they didn't have much else to lose. And yet I know that all of us in this room have this desire to be known and to know one another. I know that we all want to be known, and yet we sometimes sabotage that. I know that we want to know one another, and sometimes we sabotage that. And this manifests in small and big ways. You know, there's like this classic sitcom kind of storyline where the loving wife creates this beautiful, award-winning pecan pie every year for her husband, and she doesn't find out until after his death that actually he doesn't like pecan pie. I'm sure we've all had stories like that. It happens in bigger ways. Even just yesterday, Lori was telling me about her church in Oklahoma City. After a devastating tornado that killed 2 children, donations came flooding in from all over the world. One church, desiring to do good in the world, sent boxes, dozens of handmade quilts to their church. The church had no need. The people of Oklahoma City had no need for quilts. And so they ended up donating these quilts to Goodwill. And the church people were angry that they did not receive thank you for the quilts. And yet, Lori said, they didn't ever ask what we needed. They didn't ask what the people of Oklahoma City needed. Pain was created all around, just from not asking. These ways of failing to know one another impact us all around. We remember that Jesus taught the two greatest commandments. I think most people in this room, you're all the real committed church people, so I think I'm going to trust that you know these, right? The first is to love God. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's right. To love your neighbor as yourself. Right. First, you have to love yourself. But also, don't you have to know your neighbor to love them? Don't you have to know something about them? Something about their inner life, something about who they are, something about their hopes and dreams? What if that commandment to love your neighbor isn't just to do good things or to do the nice things that we wish we had done for us, but to get to know our neighbor enough to love them the way they need to be loved? What if we're commanded to know our neighbor? Now, friends, I started in this conference just over a year ago, and since then I've done an exercise with several groups of you. Many of you are in this room have been a part of this exercise a few times even. And now I'm gonna ask everybody in this room to do this exercise. And that's why you're sat at tables. So let me explain. I'm gonna ask each of you to share a significant story of a moment in your life. Not a 10-year span, not about the difficult teen years, not about the months and months of a frustrating job. A moment. I want you to think of a moment that had an impact in your life. Now, one way you'll know that you're telling your story about a moment, here's an example. Now, I was thinking about mountain climbing, and so I started doing some research, and then I checked out the gear that was needed, and then I made a plan. That's not a moment. A moment is, I was standing in front of a mountain, and this is what I did. So I'm going to ask you to think of a significant moment in your life. Now that moment may be a moment where you were a hero, or it was glorious and amazing, but often it's a moment where you were hurt, or betrayed, or afraid. It doesn't have to be a sad moment, but know that you won't be alone if it isn't a glorious one either. Through this exercise, I've heard stories of a moment that a child first learned that they weren't like everyone else. I've heard stories of the loss of a loved one and finding out in that moment that grief can be surrounded by love and care. I've heard many different kinds of stories, and now you all get the opportunity to hear each other's stories. But there are some rules. It has to be a moment. It has to be your story. And you cannot comment about anybody else's story. It has to be a moment. It has to be your story. And you cannot comment about anybody else's story. Now, this is why I wanted a board or a staff member at every table, because they have been a part of doing this exercise at least once with me. And so now I'm going to turn you towards one another to take turns telling your story, and your board member will help you out if you need. Go and share. And in my experience, every time after we come back to the large group, something's changed. Do you feel like that? Do you feel like something's changed? Now, because we have a lot of clergy in the room, I'm going to restrict us to one-word response. I'm one of you, I get it. Shout out, everyone, like popcorn style, one word about how it feels different.
Or closer, connected, empty,
Open.
authentic,
Energized.
deep,
Share.
no.
Grateful.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I heard connection, authenticity, relationship, connection, sadness, grief. Something changed more than you would have guessed from the beginning. It's a change that you can't calculate, that you can't predict, that you can't know how you're going to feel differently about the people sitting at your table now than you did before. Every time I've done this exercise, the room has changed. And I can tell from your responses that you feel that change also. Some of us came together last January for the Vision Summit. And at that Vision Summit, I did a kind of metaphor exercise with a basket. And I talked about how we're all connected. But sometimes we're connected in what feels like an open weave basket, to where we can carry a few things, but if we have too many parts, they fall through the cracks. And that when we tighten up our connections, we become a basket that can hold more things. If we get tight enough, we can even be one of those baskets that's watertight, right? You've seen those? I still really appreciate that metaphor, and yet I recognize over the last 9 months that it feels pretty much about us and what we can do. And I'm reminded of that human chain. And I'm thinking that really maybe the point is not just what we can build together for us, but what we can build together for the world. Working together, we have the power to do things we never could on our own. Through these relational connections, we build power. Power is a word that we are uncomfortable with in the church because we are used to thinking of power as power over. Power that dominates, power that harms, power that oppresses. But make no mistake, what you just did was powerful. What you just did built power around your table and in this room. What you just did built power in this conference. It's power with instead of power over. And power with is the power that can change the world. Power with is the power of loving our neighbor. Power with is the power of saving a drowning family. The relationships we build across the conference feel good. And we do this so that we can do good. They feel good, and we do it so that we can do good. Now, the board of this conference set a goal of deepening relational connections. Now, I let Peter and Wendy speak for the board, but I can speak for how powerful it is to build these connections. It feels good, and it creates the ability for us to do good. This is what we're doing today in this exercise. This is what we're doing today in all that we do, is we are building better and deeper connections with one another. May we remember the sharing that we did around this table, the power that was created. May it carry through the rest of the day, the authenticity, the truth-telling, the vulnerability. What would it be like if we were to hold on to that for a little bit longer? Bring that with us to our next session and the next one and the one after that. Maybe even bring that with us as we leave this place. Friends, this is how we change lives. This is how we change the world. This is how we bring about God's will on earth as it is in heaven. So friends, we just opened up our hearts in our sharing, and we shared this powerful connection with our words. I want us to do something that is probably going to be a little bit messy right now, but we're going to do this with our bodies. We are going to make a human chain, like those people did on the beach. Now, I believe if 80 strangers, stressed for time, to save people who are drowning, can gather together and do that and make that work, then the good people of the Pacific Northwest Conference can figure out how to come together right now and make a human chain, symbolizing the connection that we build together and the connection that we are going to take out into the world. So we're going to start somewhere over here, and we're going to build all the way out the door. So just like in the human chain that was made at the beach, where they had the people who did not know how to swim in the shallow water, we're going to have to be mindful of the people who are maybe not as mobile, being near the beginning of the chain, or wherever they can fit into it. I don't know about you, but I am pretty excited and energized thinking about all the things that we can do together. All the things that we can do simply based on knowing each other and connecting. Children of God, thank you for blessing me with this time to be with you.